Engage your brain and enter the mind's eye. I'm your host, Brian Turnov, on Z Talk Radio. We continue our 3-week pop culture celebration. Last week, we gleefully sang about the 50th anniversary of the Beatles landing in America and their appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show. From Ringo Starr in the amphitheater to Ringo and Honey Bun in the movie theater, this episode of The Mind's Eye is in commemoration of Quentin Tarantino's masterpiece, Pulp Fiction, which was released on this date, September 23rd, 20 years ago, 1994. A black comedy crime film known for its eclectic dialogue, ironic mix of humor and violence, non-linear storyline, and a host of cinematic allusions and pop culture references. The film was nominated for 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, and it also won for Best Original Screenplay. Our usher and guest for the evening is film critic Mark T. Conard, author of the latest thrillers Dark as Night and Killer's Coda, as well as editor of many books, including The Philosophy of Martin Scorsese, The Simpsons and Philosophy, and The Philosophy of the Coen Brothers. Mark received his PhD from Temple University and currently serves as Professor of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Marymount Manhattan College. He regularly teaches courses in philosophy, logic, phenomenology, and existentialism, amongst others. To frame our discussion about the movie, Mark will discuss his article, Symbolism, Meaning, and Nihilism in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, which is featured in issue 19 of the magazine Philosophy Now. Stay tuned after this quick commercial break when Mark reveals the metaphysical truths lurking under the rug in Tarantino's cult classic, Pulp Fiction.
Station identification.
You're listening to Z-Talk Radio Network.
Operating frequency.
On ztalkradio.com. The views expressed and opinions given by the individual hosts and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Z-Talk Radio, its affiliates, or sponsors.
We're back from commercial break, and with no further delay, it's time to check out the big brain on Mark T. Conard, film critic, author, editor, professor of philosophy, and one bad mother effer. Thank you, Mark, for giving us a slice of your time today on The Mind's Eye.
Thanks, Brian. I'm glad to be here. I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And your love of films is apparent with the courses that you've taught in the past, the books that you've edited, and the writings that you've contributed. What is it about that media that draws you in and says, this is more than just moving images, entertainment, it needs a critical lens?
Well, as you noted, my field is philosophy, which is, can be, particularly for undergraduate students, a very dense subject. And so what I've always found, and my colleagues have always found, is that when you're able to use examples from popular media, films and television, to help explain difficult philosophical ideas, it makes it much more, palatable, easier. It's easier for the students to sort of comprehend. So, for me, it's always been sort of a natural fit to on the one hand, to use film as examples, in order to express or to explain those philosophical ideas, like I say. But on the other hand, what I and some of my colleagues have really firmly come to believe is that there's so much going on in film, particularly, and also in television, that's really worthy of philosophical analysis. I mean, we're just so steeped in popular culture. It's so much a part of our lives that it really warrants some kind of examination, philosophical examination. And interesting, my first foray into this kind of examination of popular culture was Pulp Fiction. It was my Symbolism essay.
Well, I'm glad to bring the circle right back around, and I know it's been almost 2 decades since you've written it, but I'm really excited to explore the aspects of it. And I was a radio major, but part of my degree was film production and critical theory. And one time I did a presentation on Married with Children and the lack of representation on TV of the quote-unquote lower economic class. And I always thought that was a really fascinating subject. What populations do you think right now are being criminally underrepresented on TV and in the film media?
You know, it's that's hard for me really to assess.
And I know that was a curveball.
Yeah, and it's difficult because I have an almost 2-year-old at home, which means that my watching of film, going to the movies has been pretty much eliminated over the past 2 years, and I don't watch much television anymore. Although I do see some things on Netflix or on HBO to go or one of those kinds of things. So I'm current with some of the contemporary shows, but I'm really out of the loop in general in terms of the overall sort of picture of popular culture right now.
All right, well,
so I'm really in a position to answer that question is my answer.
Well, I appreciate your honesty, and sorry to throw that curveball at you. I know it was kind of random, but I just want to say that I just really respect what you do as a professor of philosophy. Today's rule of thumb is to not talk about politics or religion in general conversation, but I've always thought that discussing those two subjects is really the only way we're going to solve the world's major problems, and it's great that you can use pop culture to essentially do such a thing. So I just wanted to let you know I really respect what you're doing there.
Well, I appreciate that, and the students do really respond to it. My undergraduate students, and as you mentioned, I think at the top there, I do teach a class in popular culture and philosophy that focuses on I use the books that I've edited, so it focuses mainly on film and then a little bit on television, but the students really respond to it, and they really enjoy it, and it really is a great avenue for them to get into deeper conversations, get into the big ideas, so it works.
And we could have, a 5-hour show on that concept alone, but we're here for one thing, and we're here to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Pulp Fiction's release. And I guess before we go any further, we should give out the prerequisite spoiler alert. Do not continue to listen if you haven't seen and still plan to see Pulp Fiction, but quite frankly, shame on you if you haven't.
And what rock have you been living under?
Exactly. And can you believe it? It's been 20 years ago exactly on this date that Pulp Fiction was unleashed into the world. And in your opinion, how has it made, what type of indelible mark on cinematic history has it made?
Yeah, it's hard to believe that it's been 20 years. I remember I was out of the country at the time. I was actually doing some research on in philosophy in Germany, and the movie came out, but I sort of heard the buzz about it. I didn't see it when I was out in Germany, but I heard the buzz about it, and when I got back home, I remember a friend of mine saying, you just have to see this. You have to see this movie, and of course I was just completely blown away by it. I was completely knocked out by it. It's I think of it really as an important film for a number of different reasons. It's just it's such a bold film, and it's really such an interesting piece of storytelling in the way that Tarantino and his co-writer took these different vignettes, and it forms a coherent whole, but they have sort of rearranged the parts. And then, of course, you've got Tarantino's just encyclopedic knowledge of the history of cinema that he brings to bear. Not just the history of cinema, of course, the history of all of pop culture, but he brings that, of course, to bear in in the film itself, and all the sort of cinematic references that he makes. And then the big thing for me was this, as you know, you can see from you read in my essay, was the symbolism throughout the thing that really captured my attention and really made me want to think about what it all meant and sort of piece it all together. And the other part of it too is I think of Tarantino as very much as a postmodern filmmaker, and Pulp Fiction really is a sort of postmodern artifact. That really comes out in, I would say, in Kill Bill. I think that's both parts. Thinking of it together is really almost a perfect sort of postmodern piece of work. But the elements are there in, say, Reservoir Dogs and also Pulp Fiction, for example.
Yeah, and he does a wonderful job of combining all these different type of movie genres into one. You got a black comedy, you have a gangster film, and so forth. And that's, I was 12 years old when it first came out, and I probably shouldn't have seen it at that age, but it always left a mark on me. And I guess we're both dating ourselves here by telling when we both saw it. But to this day, 20 years later, and fully understanding even more so, it really just it rings true to this day how much he's talking about and what you're talking about in the article. So let's get into that. And I know many of the listeners, like myself, were into the lingering mysteries, and I'm sure they're chomping at the bits waiting to hear us talk about it. But I want to frame our conversation through the critical lens from your Philosophy Now article, which you just talked about, Symbolism, Meaning, and Nihilism in Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction. So explain the thesis for this paper.
Yeah, so as I said, when I first saw the film and on repeat viewings, I was really captured by some of the symbolism of the watch, for example, Butch's watch, that means so much to him, and that he's really intent on retrieving, even that, his own, even putting himself in danger of doing it. The briefcase that Marcellus Wallace gets back, that Vincent and Jules get back before Marcellus Wallace, the Band-Aid on the back of his head. All these different symbols sort of leapt out at me. Butch's choice of weapons as he goes back into the basement to save Marcellus. Like I say, all these symbols leapt out at me, and I knew there had to be some way of thinking of the movie and sort of interpreting it to make sense of these symbols, and I also, put it. I sort of frame it in terms of the movie as this sort of postmodern artifact that, I don't know. Do you want me to go? Do you want me to go ahead and do the whole spoiler and talk about the whole thesis of the...
Yeah, go right ahead. Well, we're going to, as you talk about it, I may jump in and ask you to talk about things, but yeah, definitely talk about it, because, it's about American nihilism, and I think it's what you're bringing to the conversation is really fascinating. So jump right into it.
Okay. Yeah, so the thesis of the piece is that, you have these gangsters living in this world, and they communicate with one another via pop culture. So there are all these pop culture references laced throughout their conversation. In the very beginning of the piece is that amazing and sort of unforgettable conversation about what a Big Mac is called, or a Whopper is called in Europe. And, you can get a glass of beer at the movies and all this, or at a McDonald's and all this kind of thing. So you have these sort of transient pop culture symbols and reference points. They're really ephemeral. That through which these characters communicate and understand one another, and that's set in sort of stark contrast to this this biblical quote, so-called biblical quote, because it's mostly composed by Tarantino himself, but this biblical quote that Jules recites to his victims before he kills them, and the point there is that there's lacking from these characters' lives a sort of framework of meaning and value that give a sort of sense to the way that they live and the things that they do. Their lives are really organized in a sort of hierarchy of power, with Marcellus Wallace at the top of this, sort of calling the shots, so that whatever he wants, they'll do, and they'll do anything necessary to sort of achieve that end. And all means are sort of acceptable, and I think that's symbolized by the briefcase. We never see the contents of the briefcase, but we see this sort of glow, which is a cinematic reference to Kiss Me Deadly, the classic film noir. But in any event, in the diner scene, the Tim Roth character asks Jules what's in it, and he says it's his boss's dirty laundry. And the point of it is, there's always the question what's in the briefcase, and I argue in the essay is that the point of it is it doesn't matter what's in the briefcase. It's just the point of the whole thing is that Marcellus Wallace wants it back, and because he wants it back, it becomes valuable. So it could very well be his dirty laundry. It just simply doesn't matter. So that without, again, a sort of objective framework of meaning and value to sort of order our lives and make sense of our actions, nothing is inherently worth anything. And this is what nihilism is all about. Nothing is worth anything, inherently worth anything. It gains its worth purely through, like I say, this sort of system of power. And then the real meaning comes about through Butch's actions, actually. So the really interesting thing about Butch, and a lot of interesting things about Butch, but he's a boxer, he's a fighter, and he makes this deal with Marcellus, which he reneges on. And the interesting thing is the symbolism of the watch. Now it's passed down to him through his paternal line. His great grandfather was going off to World War I and bought the watch, was able to pass it on to his son, who went to the Second World War, and then Butch's father went to Vietnam. And so the really interesting thing there is that Butch's all the men in his paternal line were warriors, right? They were part of a sort of brotherhood and a system, like I say, where they had meaningful relationships that were based in a kind of objective framework of meaning and value. The really interesting thing, like I say, about Butch is that he's a boxer, which makes him a kind of a warrior, but he steps into the ring alone. He's by himself. He's isolated. He doesn't have that connection to his, like I say, paternal sort of warrior line. So the watch is passed down to him in a very funny and interesting way, right? So he gets the watch from his father's war comrade, Christopher Walken character, who had to hide the watch in his ass in order to keep it from his Vietnamese captors. And so, as I argue in the piece, when it comes to Butch, the watch, would typically be a sort of symbol of American sort of manhood. That, here, son, here is my watch. I want you to wear it and keep it, and sort of feel pride in the family line, and have something to sort of meaningful to stand up for and to contribute to, and so forth. But when it gets passed down to Butch, the way it gets passed down, and of course his father hid it first, but died significantly of dysentery before he passed it on to the Christopher Walken character. The watch is a piece of shit. Or in other words, right, it's an empty symbol.
Right.
It doesn't mean anything yet to Butch. So he has a sense that it should mean something because he tries to impress on Fabienne, his girlfriend, that he wants to bring the watch with him, and she forgets to pack it and so forth. So he has to return, but of course gets into this terrible fight with Marcellus, and they end up in the basement of the pawn shop with the hillbillies and the gimp, and they're raping Marcellus, and they're of course going to rape Butch, but he's able to escape. Now, Butch then is able to, or he has this sort of let's put it this way, he has this sort of transformational moment when he's ready to escape, he's ready to run out, but he decides to turn around and go back and save Marcellus. And his choice of weapons is highly significant, right? Because he looks at a hammer, a baseball bat, and a chainsaw, which he all rejects. And I argue that these could be looked at as sort of symbols of Americana, particularly the baseball bat. But he finally chooses a samurai sword, which again is highly significant because it means that Butch now is performing this act, a courageous act. He's doing something, he's not doing something selfish. He's doing something for someone else. He's doing something in a sense noble, and so he's reconnecting himself to his paternal line, his paternal warrior line, by taking up the sword and doing something noble and courageous. And so he returns to the basement, of course, and he kills one of the hillbillies, and he saves Marcellus. And now the watch, he's worthy of receiving the watch, right? He's worthy of connecting to his paternal warrior line. And all this, like I say, I found absolutely fascinating. But then Butch has made an arrangement to meet his friend. All this sort of comes full circle because Butch makes an arrangement to meet his friend in Knoxville, Tennessee. And if you go back to the story that Christopher Walken tells, his character tells,
mm-hmm.
His great-grandfather originally bought the watch in a general store in Knoxville, Tennessee. So it's clear, like I say, that connection has been made. He's now a part of that family line, that part of that warrior line, and is worthy of receiving the watch.
And Samuel Jackson had a transformative experience. His seems to be less symbolic, used through devices. His more seems to be a divine intervention. Talk about how his transformation from having, from being a nihilist himself into finally having some type of moral objective code.
Right, exactly. So it was yes, that's what the movie's essentially about. It's about the transformation of these two characters. Is the Butch transformation, and then it's Jules' transformation when he finally begins to think about what the meaning of that biblical passage is. And he's right. He the Frank Whalen character, or no, it's who comes into the room. I'm forgetting now with the gun, but starts shooting. One of the characters, right in the apartment, comes into the room and starts shooting, and he completely misses.
Right, exactly.
And you're right. So Jules takes this as divine intervention, and whether it is or not doesn't really matter. What is significant is that it makes Jules, like you say, think about the way he is living and think about the meaning of the passage, such that he gives it those different interpretations to the Tim Roth character at the end of the film, in the middle of the robbery, and so he's seems to be on his path to trying to sort of grasp onto something larger than himself, and to try and grasp something, like I say, larger that will provide the kind of meaning and value that we were talking about. It doesn't seem as complete a transformation as you just said, as Butch goes through, but at least puts him on a sort of path of reflection. And of course, Vincent doesn't have any such transformation at all. He's still stuck in the old sort of mode of thinking about things. And interesting, I haven't really thought about it, but that may be the reason why he ends up dying in the movie. Although it's at the end of the narrative, but it's in the middle of the film when Butch shoots him back in the apartment. I hadn't really thought about that before, but perhaps that's symbolic of Vincent's sort of lack of transformation.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting part, and you say, the characters are nihilists themselves before the transformation, and I'm not sure if Jules was a complete nihilist or he didn't have some type of morals, because, his famous movie monologue, Ezekiel 25:17, we're not going to rattle it off right here. Everybody probably knows it at this point, but, that passage itself wasn't lifted word for word from the Bible. It's kind of a mix of his own rhetoric. So, does that change your interpretation at all, that he wasn't always a nihilist, but there was always, maybe there was a little moral code that he was playing by, but it was a gray area, so to speak, and that's now finally he's being transformed?
I still sort of hold on to my main thesis. I think that he is a nihilist, or the part of the problem is that they don't realize that they're nihilists, right? So he does articulate this, or he does recite the passage, but he really doesn't seem to have any understanding of what it means.
Right.
Well, he did have, I guess, in the coffee shop scene, he does say that he at first had believed one interpretation of it. So maybe you're right, although he seems to have gotten it wrong.
To say the least, yeah.
Right, he himself understands, right, towards the end of the film, and reinterprets it for the Tim Roth character. But I mean, just think of the irony of it. Of course, is that he's reciting the Bible just before he murders someone. So I think that in itself is very, very sort of telling of his sort of nihilistic ways.
And I hear, is that the city background I'm hearing right there?
Yeah, I live right on Houston Street. It's unbelievably noisy sometimes.
Oh, yes, I know. I used to teach at a school near there, and I used to live in Brooklyn, so I hear a city background. I can pinpoint that from anywhere, especially the cops in the background.
Exactly.
And, I'm from a philosophical layman. It seems that nihilism is pretty much saying that existence is pointless. It has an absent moral code, and life has no meaning, no purpose or value. And I can almost understand that. I can even sympathize with the first two aspects, that life may be meaningless or purposeless, and sometimes I've even thought that way. But to me, believing that life has no value is in itself quite the scary thought. It seems a bit extremist. To me, life in itself is value.
Right.
What do you think there?
Yeah, and I talk about this in the essay, but the great German philosopher Nietzsche frames this in terms of what he calls the death of God, and to sort of put it briefly, what he argues or claims is that through thousands of years, human beings have sort of understood themselves, their lives, and their place in the world, and all the meaning and value of their lives through a sort of transcendent ideal, starting back, could be with Plato's theory of forms, but then gets transformed, of course, into Christianity and a sort of absent or transcendent heaven and God and so forth. And then with the scientific revolution, and then the development of evolutionary theory through the 19th century, then Nietzsche's point is that we cease to believe in the old sort of literal interpretation of the metaphysics of the Bible. We cease to believe in creation in 6 days and all that sort of thing. And then it all gets replaced with a kind of natural scientific understanding of the world. But the problem is that all, like I say, all the meaning and value of our lives was built upon that old metaphysics, right? Those old belief systems. And so the danger that Nietzsche foresaw was this sort of collapse into a kind of nihilistic state. I mean, he predicted very well the nihilism of the 20th and now the 21st centuries. And so his own efforts were to help us get beyond that nihilistic stage. He wanted us to sort of take a hammer to our old ideals, our old belief systems, which we sort of still cling to, but only in a very sort of half-hearted, if even that sort of way. You know, people go to church on Sunday, but then they do whatever the hell they want through the rest of the week. And so he wanted us, like I say, to take a hammer to all that. One of the subtitles of one of his books, in fact, is How to Philosophize with a Hammer. And then to reinvest our lives with meaning and value. And he thought that there indeed was meaning and value, that we could invest our lives with meaning and value, but it couldn't come and shouldn't come from some sort of transcendent source, but has to come from ourselves and our own meaning, making and value making.
And I guess I would agree with that. Do you think, since you said, I guess you would agree that there is an attitude of nihilism that you think is pervasive across America, undeniably?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's here. I think it's present. I think it's hard to miss, actually.
Yeah, and I guess there might be some evidence of that. A recent poll said somewhere, I think, around 20% of the American population is non-religious, and but I don't know if that necessarily means that they don't think that life has no value or that they're nihilists in themselves. I think that we are doing that readjustment right now. I think we can have that faith without being religious at the same time. At least that's me personally. I adhere to that, and it seems that most of the people I know adhere to that as well, of my generation, in the 30s to 40s.
Right. Yeah. That you don't have to invest your life with meaning and value through religion. In fact, according to someone like Nietzsche, that's the worst way to do it. But that you can give your own life meaning and value. And there are ways, other ways to connect to other people and to build something significant with your life that will allow you to escape that kind of nihilism.
So I got to know, are you a nihilist?
I don't think so.
What's your philosophical perspective on life?
Well, I sort of took a break from Nietzsche for a while. I wrote my dissertation on him. That's what I was doing in Germany. And I sort of got away from that for a while and got really invested in the whole sort of pop culture and philosophy stuff. But recently I've returned to Nietzsche, and I'm really, it's very interesting to come back to him after a decade or so, from a more sort of mature and experienced perspective, and to think about it. And plus, it's just been some outstanding scholarship in the last 10 years on Nietzsche. But in any event, I think of myself more and more recently as a thoroughgoing sort of Nietzschean. So I think that's the position I'm coming from. If that answers your question at all, I don't know.
A bit, and we could talk about Nietzsche for hours upon hours. So I guess we should kind of backtrack and get back to Pulp Fiction for a moment. And for those just joining us on The Mind's Eye, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of Pulp Fiction's release with film critic Mark T. Conard. And before we touched on the two of the enduring mysteries of the movie, the Band-Aid and the briefcase. And, there were so many theories out about it, especially the briefcase. Did it contain the soul of Marcellus Wallace, diamonds, Tarantino's missing Oscar, etc.? And you contended before that you touched on that it was inconsequential to the plot, and it seems that history did prove you correct. Tarantino did say it was a MacGuffin, which is, I guess that's just a device to keep the plot moving forward. And I've always thought that maybe a little bit more important aspect of that, the contents, was that the code itself was 666 to unlock the briefcase. And does that code, putting 666 on it, put value on it, almost kind of not in favor of your argument? Since Marsalis Wallace put a 666 on it, does that mean they're nihilist, that he's a nihilist? How does that fit into your overall framework of your interpretation?
Oh, I think that's just Tarantino sort of being playful. I don't really have a reading of that. I think he's just sort of messing with us and making us want to guess.
I hate when he does that, huh?
It is a very nice cinematic reference, like I said, to "Kiss Me Deadly," one of those classic film noirs. It was, in those in that period, there was a lot in the classic film noir period in the 40s and the 50s. There was a lot of anxiety about a lot of things. Nazism, the Second World War, development of the atomic bomb, and so in that classic film, there's radioactive material in this briefcase that is at the end of the film. That's why it glows, and that it gets sort of unleashed at the end in this giant explosion. And so the briefcase, like I say, is a cinematic reference to that classic movie. But in terms of, it is, like you say, it is a kind of a MacGuffin. In terms of the meaning of Pulp Fiction, again, my reading is that it simply doesn't matter what's in it, and precisely because of the nihilism and this sort of hierarchy of power, it gains importance. Like I said, it could very well be the boss's dirty laundry, but it gains importance simply because he wants it. I mean, there's nothing else. That's the point of my argument, right? There is no larger objective sort of framework of value to decide whether or not what's in is valuable. The only thing that you can appeal to is Marsalis' say-so. So, like I say, it fits. In that respect, it fits well into my argument. I hadn't heard the one about the missing Oscar. That's fine.
I just read that one recently. I didn't hear about it until recently. I thought that was a good one. And I guess let's address the other one too, because you briefly wrote about it in your paper, the infamous Band-Aid on the back of Marsalis' neck. And one theory is that this is my favorite theory. It was covering the hole where the devil's helpers, the Brett and the gang who Jules and Vern killed in the beginning, they stole Marsalis' soul. And in your article, you had an original theory for the Band-Aid that I never heard before. You mind sharing it for the listeners? And it goes into your theory as well.
Well, it's just a brief gloss on that.
Very briefly.
Very brief. And it's simply that Band-Aids not only help you heal, bandages in general, Band-Aids help you heal, but they're also sort of covering, right? They hide something. You don't want people to watch you bleeding or watch you scabbing over or whatever. So it's a matter of, like I say, of a cover or something to hide something, and that's my reading of it in the essay, is that the Band-Aid sort of covers over or hides Marsalis' intentions. They're hidden from us, and again, because he's at the top of the sort of hierarchy of power, it's a matter of saying that there is his say, even though it's mysterious to us, we don't know what it is. His thinking, his intention. It's just a matter of the orders that he gives that imbues things with meaning and value. So the Band-Aid, like I say, is just, in my reading, just a matter of hiding or covering over his intentions.
And I think that these two mysteries bring up important aspects of filmmaking. First, sometimes less is more, and second, it says that the viewer's interpretation and their own imagination is just as powerful as the director's intent. Would you agree there?
Yeah, definitely with both of those points. I think less is almost always better. And yes, secondly, the reader's interpretation, the viewer's interpretation is a crucial aspect of the experience of whether it's reading or a cinematic experience. It's utterly crucial, and very often the writer, the script writer, the author, the filmmaker is not the best interpreter of his work, and certainly not the only interpreter of his work. I mean, he or she might have certain intentions in mind, but once the piece is out there, it's in that intersection between the artifact and the viewer or the reader that the experience happens, that the world sort of opens up, and so it is open to various interpretations, it seems to me.
And with the Band-Aid, okay, good. I thought I was breaking up for a moment. With the Band-Aid, we know that the fans of Pulp Fiction have become obsessive, and through their investigations, they say that Ving Rhames actually happened to have a real life cut, and there's a large scar that's visible on the back of his head in later films, and I think that touches on another aspect. Do you think that in recent years there seems to be a big move, or a lot of obsessiveness over TV and movies? Do you think this craziness factors of fandomhood is hurting films at all?
I don't know that it's hurting. It's hurting films. It's sort of fun. I mean, I like that story if it's true. It's so often these sort of accidental little things that add so much sort of flavor and texture to whether it's a piece of writing or a piece of filmmaking, and make it sort of fun. Now, I don't think the obsessiveness. I mean, certainly, the digital age has really made this kind of obsessiveness that you're talking about possible. Now that we're able to minutely scrutinize, every frame of a movie, I don't think it hurts things. I think it's kind of fun. Like you say, there may not be in many cases any kind of definitive answer, or it's Tarantino just shrug and say, "No, it didn't really mean anything." But it's still fun to sort of theorize and speculate.
I just don't like these tangible answers that for these enduring mysteries. That kind of took the air out of my balloon with the Band-Aid, so to speak. But I'm going to try and ignore it and black that out of my memory, so I can keep thinking that there was something there. But every time,
no matter how it actually came to be on his head, right? It's still open to interpretation in terms of the narrative of the film. So I don't think the source of it deflates any interpretive possibilities.
True. And every time a significant event is about to happen or is happening, a character goes into a washroom. Vincent, while Mia is ODing, Jules during the robbery, Butch shooting Vern. That seems to be a signature in his movies as well, and some of his other signatures pop up in Pulp Fiction. The obsession with feet, a usual trunk shot. How do these scenes play into the overall psychology of Tarantino's films and Pulp Fiction? What do you think it tells us about Tarantino that he keeps reusing, the bathroom, a trunk shot, and his obsession with feet?
It's a hard one. I don't really know what to say.
Well, I guess he has a foot fetish. That we do know. That's the one thing I guess we can't say.
Yeah, no, I don't know exactly. I mean, the trunk sort of implies a sort of claustrophobia, I guess, right? I mean, you see in in Jackie Brown when Sam Jackson's character locks the other dude in the trunk and gives him a gun. It's sort of terrible, sort of to be confined like that. But yeah, it implies a certain kind of claustrophobia. It's a good way to sort of frame a shot too, I guess, and give it a sense of that kind of claustrophobia. I hadn't really thought about the bathroom shots before. Not sure what the significance of that might be, although there may be some sort of tie-in to my theory about the watch as a piece of shit.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something there that would relate to your interpretation, for sure.
Yeah, could be. I don't know what the foot fetish is, although it makes for some funny dialogue.
Yes, it does.
About, the dialogue about giving foot massages is pretty hilarious.
We're closing in on the hour, so we only have a few more minutes, and I got a couple questions that remain. Imagine this: Samuel L. Jackson comes inside your home right now. He says he says, "Mother effer." He puts a gun to your head and says, "You have to write the best sequel to Pulp Fiction ever right now." How could you and how would you continue the story?
Oh wow. I think I'd have to let him shoot me on that one.
I know you don't want to ruin it, right?
I think it's sort of perfect as it is. How would you even think about continuing it? I mean, there's really not, it sort of all closes in on itself. I mean, you could do sort of Jules sort of wandering the countryside, trying to find meaning and eating out of garbage bins and all that sort of thing, like Vincent said, or you can have Butch and his girlfriend escaping from Knoxville and meeting up with his friend and all that. But in terms of, I don't know how else you would do it. I think it's sort of perfect in the way that it is.
I know. How dare I even ask that question? Quite frankly.
Yes, how dare you?
And I guess if I had to do it, there was a gun to my head. The only thing that I've ever thought that could possibly continue it, almost like a next generation style thing, that there seemed to be a little, some alluding to the fact that Butch's girlfriend, Fabian, was pregnant. She was looking at herself in the mirror with the pot belly. She was unusually hungry that morning. There was an attempted conversation that eventually got, I guess, aborted because Butch fell asleep. So if I had to do something, I would maybe put it that light into it, that the next generation of Butch there. But after that, I can't think of anything else to make the story continue.
Yeah, that's good. I hadn't really thought about the pregnancy possibility, but you're right. There are some clues that could lead us there. So good reading.
Oh, well, thank you. I watched it last night again, so I've been watching a bunch in preparation. And just to draw it back to your article about nihilism, and so do you think Tarantino was ultimately rejecting the ideas of nihilism with the movie, since both Jules and Butch had transformative, redemptive experiences that gave them a sense of moral code? Or is it pro-nihilism, would you say?
I don't think it's consciously sort of pro-nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
I actually, you probably haven't read it, but I actually wrote an article that appears in my neo-noir book on it's focused mainly on Reservoir Dogs, but it also touches on Pulp Fiction and also on Kill Bill particularly. That argues that most of his, by that point, his films were largely about redemption. And that's certainly the case in Reservoir Dogs, like I say. It's certainly the case in these situations in Pulp Fiction, and certainly the case in Kill Bill. It was written before Inglourious Bastards, for example. But the films are about redemption, but that the characters' attempts at redemption are undermined precisely because of the postmodern sort of / nihilistic setting that they're set in. So I don't know that Tarantino worries about sort of nihilism or consciously embracing nihilism, but I think he's very much, I know he's very much attuned to a sort of pop culture sensibility that I don't know if you could say it's inherently nihilistic, but it's certainly it certainly goes along with nihilism. So like I say, I don't think consciously he's sort of embracing it, but it seems to me it's there in his sort of postmodern sensibility.
And you wrote this about 17 years ago, and has your opinion or interpretation changed at all, or has it really only been reconfirmed since then?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything or read anything that would sort of change my mind. I mean, I still think of it in the same way, and particularly in the interpretation of Butch and the Watch. I mean, it seems very clear what's going on there. You know, some of these other symbols are, as you've been pointing out, a bit more open to interpretation or dispute or whatever, but the situation with Butch seems to me quite clear. So it's the same, I think. I haven't really changed anything.
Excellent. And before we say adieu for this edition, I know you're also the author of 2 thrillers that were recently released. Give those a plug, and any other social media sites that you care to share.
Yeah, so I in addition to my philosophy and pop culture stuff, I do write suspense fiction. So not too long ago, I had released their ebooks, 2 novels. One's called Darkest Night, and the other is called Killer's Coda. And you can find them on Amazon or at a site called theroguereader.com. They're the actual publishers of the thing. And I do have a blog. It's called marktconard.com. There's all kinds of pop culture and philosophy and other kinds of crazy stuff because I have a bit of a warped sense of humor. So go take a look at that as well.
And we'll post that information on our site too, so the listeners can get that information there as well. And Mark T. Conard, it has been a pleasure peeling off the metaphysical layers of Pulp Fiction on the mind's eye. Your time is so greatly appreciated, and I look forward to the next one. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's been a lot of fun. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it.
That was film critic and author Mark T. Conard on the philosophy of Pulp Fiction. For quick links to his blog or to see the upcoming guest schedule, visit our website, themindseyemedia.com. And don't forget to check out the recent blog entry in celebration of the Winter Soldier's release, DVD release. Check out Lessons on History and Patriotism from Captain America's The Winter Soldier. Once again, that's at themindseyemedia.com. And for daily and weekly updates, check out our brand spanking new Facebook page, facebook.com/Mindseye Show. MINDSEYE Show. Once again, facebook.com/Mindseye Show. Join me again next week in the 3rd and final installment of our pop culture celebration. We're celebrating the anniversary of one of baseball's most enduring legends, with guest Paul Aaron, author of Did Babe Ruth Call His Shot? And Other Unsolved Mysteries of Baseball. It's going to be a great one as we talk about baseball's lingering questions and give out a few playoff predictions. As always, thank you so much for joining me on The Mind's Eye. I'm your host, Brian Turnov, and this is Z Talk Radio.
Station identification.
You're listening to Z Talk Radio Network
Operating frequency.
on ztalkradio.com.